What happens when the son of the most powerful man in the country walks into a closed-door Capitol Hill session, stands up without warning, and decides to lecture a seasoned congresswoman on education, poverty, and responsibility? He thought this would be a discussion. He thought this would be safe. What he didn't realize was that he was about to challenge the wrong woman. In the wrong room. On the wrong subject. Because what Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just silence Barron Trump. It rewired the entire room. And by the time it was over, the president's son wasn't the one teaching the lesson anymore. Stay with me because this wasn't a political argument. It was a reality check. Barron Trump stood up. And the room froze. No one had expected him to speak. Not like this. Not at all. This wasn't a rally. It wasn't a press conference. There were no cameras, no microphones, no viral soundbites waiting to be clipped. This was a closed-door roundtable on Capitol Hill, a high-level policy discussion bringing together congressional leaders and a select group of youth delegates focused on education equity and student opportunity. Serious people, serious issues. And until that moment, everything had gone according to plan. Representative Jasmine Crockett had just finished speaking. Her voice had been calm but urgent, controlled but charged with lived experience. She spoke about public schools in South Dallas. Textbooks older than the students using them. One nurse for over 1,000 kids. Teachers paying out of pocket for supplies. Students missing class not because they didn't care but because life didn't give them a choice. She wasn't reciting statistics. She was telling the truth. And the room had been listening. Then someone cleared their throat. Quietly. Almost politely. Barron Trump? The president's son. 19 years old. Nearly 6'8", dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit. He didn't look nervous. He looked prepared. When he rose from his chair at the back of the room, chair stopped creaking, pen stopped scratching paper. Even Crockett paused. The moderator hesitated then nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Trump." What followed wasn't a question. It wasn't even curiosity. It was a lecture. "Congresswoman Crockett," Barron began, voice smooth and measured, "you talk about investing more money into public education like it's the only solution, but throwing money at a broken system hasn't worked for decades." A few eyebrows lifted. Phones disappeared into pockets. Barron continued, "Maybe what we need isn't more spending but real innovation, real accountability." He spoke like someone used to being heard. Like someone whose ideas were usually met with agreement, not resistance. Then he went further. "We talk about student debt like it's unavoidable. But what about personal responsibility? What about students choosing degrees that don't offer any real return on investment?" That's when the air changed. Not louder. Heavy. A few student delegates shifted in their seats. One young woman folded her arms. Crockett didn't move. She let him finish. Because she knew something he didn't. When you let someone talk long enough, they tell you exactly who they are. To the outside world, Barron Trump had always been an enigma. Raised behind gates, cameras, and Secret Service lines. Rarely interviewed. Rarely heard. But recently, things had changed. At 19, he began stepping into political spaces, observing meetings, attending policy dinners, listening to strategists debate the future of America late into the night. Some said he was sharp. Others said he was sheltered. Most agreed on one thing. This was his first real test. And he had chosen Jasmine Crockett as his opponent. Crockett didn't get here because a door opened. She kicked doors in. Former public defender. Civil rights attorney. A woman who had spent her career standing between power and people without it. She'd cross-examined police officers, grilled corporate executives, and dismantled congressional arguments without raising her voice. And now? She sat silently, letting the president's son finish. When Crockett finally spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She sounded certain. "Mr. Trump," she said, "I've argued cases in courtrooms more hostile than this. I've cross-examined people with more power than truth. And I want to thank you." Barron blinked. She continued, "What you just said perfectly demonstrates what happens when people grow up in echo chambers." The room leaned in. "You weren't being cruel," Crockett said, "but you were being familiar. That script you just delivered? I've heard it for years from boardrooms, donors, and people who have never had to choose between rent and textbooks. She talked about classrooms with broken heaters, Texas summers without air conditioning, schools holding fundraisers just to stay open. It's easy to talk about responsibility when the system was built to catch you before you fall. No one interrupted. No one dared. In my district, Crockett said, a black girl going to college, any college, is an act of resistance. You could see it hit. Not just Barron. Everyone. That degree you call low return? For her, it's a declaration that she refuses to be erased by statistics. Silence. Then Crockett leaned forward. This is about accountability, she said, but it's the accountability of privilege. She paused. Come with me to South Dallas. No cameras. No aides. One weekend. Then tell me if all they need is innovation. She leaned back. Finished. No applause. No clapping. Just truth settling into the room. Barron Trump didn't argue. Didn't interrupt. Didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood. Walked across the room. And shook her hand. Later, when asked for comment, he said only, sometimes the best thing you can do is listen. To understand why that room fell so completely silent, you have to understand what usually happens in rooms like that. Capitol Hill roundtables are polite by design. People speak in safe language. Everyone nods. Disagreements are softened with phrases like respectfully and from my perspective. Rarely does anyone say what they actually mean. And almost never does someone speak from lived experience in a way that disrupts the hierarchy of the room. That day, Jasmine Crockett did exactly that. While the doors were closed, the audience wasn't just the people sitting at that table. It was every student who had ever been told they just didn't try hard enough. Every parent who worked 2 jobs and still came up short. Every teacher who paid for supplies out of pocket and got blamed for outcomes they couldn't control. Those people weren't in the room. But they were present. And Crockett spoke for them. As the session resumed, Barron returned to his seat. He didn't check his phone. Didn't whisper to an aide. He just sat there. Listening. For the rest of the discussion, he didn't speak again. But those watching closely noticed something subtle. He was taking notes. Not performative notes. Real ones. This wasn't the kind of education Barron Trump had grown up with. This wasn't private tutors. Or gated campuses. Or policy memos written by consultants. This was education the hard way. Through discomfort. Through challenge. Through being told without cruelty, but without softness that you don't know what you think you know. People later asked why Jasmine Crockett stayed so calm. Why she didn't snap. Why she didn't humiliate him. The answer is simple. Because shouting would have made it about ego. Calm made it about truth. She wasn't trying to win a debate. She was trying to land a message. And messages stick better when they aren't wrapped in anger. One student delegate would later describe the moment like this. It felt like someone finally said the quiet part out loud for us. Another said, I realized policy isn't just numbers. It's people. That's what moments like this do. They change how people see the work. This wasn't a viral clapback. It wasn't a mic drop. It wasn't a political ambush. No one lost their temper. No one was embarrassed for sport. What happened was far more uncomfortable than that. Someone with power was asked to listen. When Barron stood and extended his hand, it wasn't optics. There were no cameras. No staff coordinating angles. Just a human acknowledgement. I heard you. That handshake didn't erase privilege. But it cracked the armor. And cracks are where learning starts. That evening, Jasmine Crockett returned to her office. Exhausted but grounded. Not because she dominated a conversation, but because she'd spoken truth where it mattered. When asked if she thought Barron understood, she didn't rush to answer. Understanding takes time, she said. But hearing, I think he heard. Across the city, Barron sat in the back seat of a black SUV. Washington blurred past the window. For most of his life, America had been explained to him. That day, it had been shown to him. And there's a difference. This story isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not about age or lineage. It's about what happens when theory collides with reality. When lived experience walks into rooms built on abstraction and refuses to whisper. To really understand why this moment stretched on people's minds long after the chairs were pushed back, you have to understand how power usually behaves. In rooms like this, hierarchy is invisible but absolute. Titles matter. Last names matter. Who you're related to matters. Young people are expected to listen. Veterans are expected to speak. And the children of presidents? They are almost never challenged directly. That unspoken rule cracked that day. Normally, a moderator would step in, redirect the conversation, thank the speaker and move on. But no one did. Because everyone in the room sensed it. This wasn't a derailment. This was a collision. And sometimes the most honest moments come when protocol fails. People often mistake silence for weakness. But in politics, silence can be a weapon. Crockett used it deliberately. She let Barron finish not because she agreed, but because she wanted the room to fully absorb what was being said. Every assumption, every blind spot, every gap between theory and reality. By the time she spoke, there was nowhere for those ideas to hide. Education policy in America has always been debated by people far removed from its consequences. Decisions made in clean rooms, about crowded classrooms, budgets discussed by people who never sat in broken desks. Crockett wasn't just responding to Barron. She was responding to decades of that disconnect. From Barron's point of view, none of what he said felt radical. He had heard versions of it his entire life. In donor meetings, at private dinners, from people praised as serious thinkers. That's what made this moment so jarring. For the first time, those ideas weren't met with approval, but with reality. The youngest people in the room understood the stakes immediately. They weren't watching a debate. They were watching which worldview would be treated as legitimate. And when Crockett spoke, something shifted. Their posture changed. Their questions sharpened. They realized their experiences weren't liabilities. They were evidence. Some later claimed the exchange must have been planned. It wasn't. No one would script this kind of discomfort. Real tension doesn't follow clean arcs. It lingers. It unsettles. And it leaves people quiet when they'd rather clap. Barron never publicly critiqued Crockett after that day. No social media posts. No interviews pushing back. That absence mattered. Sometimes growth isn't loud. Sometimes it's restraint. She could have embarrassed him. She chose not to. Because humiliation hardens people. Invitation opens doors. That distinction is the difference between winning an argument and changing a mind. People who were there would later say the rest of the session felt different. More honest. Less scripted. As if something fragile, but important had been acknowledged. That room contained two versions of America. One shaped by access. One shaped by endurance. They don't often speak directly to each other. That day they did. And neither walked out unchanged. Think about how rare that is. Not outrage. Not spectacle. Just truth. Delivered calmly. Received reluctantly. And allowed to exist without immediate resolution. Because it didn't end with applause. Or victory. Or defeat. It ended with uncertainty. And uncertainty is where growth lives. This wasn't about who won. It was about who listened. Who spoke from experience. And who realized experience can't be argued away. Power without perspective is just noise. Perspective, when spoken with clarity, can quiet even the most powerful names. If this story felt slow, that was intentional. Because real understanding doesn't come in sound bites. It comes in pauses. In discomfort. In silence. And sometimes, in a quiet room on Capitol Hill. That silence is where something real begins. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. This wasn't about who won an argument or who had the sharper talking points. It was about what happens when lived experience walks into rooms built on theory and refuses to be quiet. Power can command attention, but perspective commands truth. In that silence, understanding began to form. If this story made you think, made you uncomfortable, or made you see things differently, take a second to support the conversation by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. Because progress doesn't start with applause, it starts with listening.